Hi, everyone. We are super excited to have you here. If you don't mind sending or sharing in your chat your name and pronouns, and if you're with any organization, love to know where you are listening from. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining. We're going to start in about 1 more minute. So if you don't mind sharing your name, pronouns, and where, if you're with an organization, and where you're listening, or where you're with us, where you're from. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Tamaya Cox Toure, and I'm the Executive Director of the ACLU of Oklahoma. And I'm so happy that you are joining our 2026 legislative wrap up. It is great to see folks in the chat. We have people from Oklahoma City and Shawnee, as well as Tulsa, representing lots of organizations. So we're really excited that you're here joining us to learn the good, the bad, the ugly of session. I am really excited to share that this session, it's one of those where it could have been worse. We always get nervous a session that's happening right before an election. And I'm excited that our policy director, Cindy Wynn, is going to tell you everything. But we also want to make this as interactive as possible as we can. So if you have any questions for any of our panelists that are going to share kind of a little bit about the session, please use the Q&A function or the chat function in the webinar. We will continue to monitor and make sure that your questions get asked as we're able to. Also, if you're interested in knowing what bills we were tracking, please use the QR code that is on the screen as well to learn. But again, we use this as a service to our members and our supporters as a resource. If you want to make sure that you are aware of what we're doing throughout session, there's also a QR code to make sure that you're up to date on everything the ACLU of Oklahoma is doing. So with that, as a reminder, we are in a webinar presentation, so we are unable to unmute or anyone. So if you do have questions, please use the Q&A function or use the chat function. With that, I'm going to kick it over to our amazing policy director, Cindy Nguyen. Again, so happy, actually. Yes, so that is the agenda for the day that she'll kind of go over more, but for the hour, I guess. But with that, let me kick it over to her, and so happy that you all are with us today.
Thanks so much, Tamaya. Hi, everyone. My name is Cindy Nguyen. My pronouns are she, hers, and I get the honor and privilege of a lifetime to serve as the policy director for the ACLU of Oklahoma. And unfortunately, I do have news to share at the very beginning. After 4 years as the policy director, this will be my last legislative wrap up, as I will be leaving the ACLU of Oklahoma next month to join another organization. I will say I won't be going very far. You will continue to see me advocating for civil rights and civil liberties under the dome. So I won't be going very far. So to all of our supporters and volunteers and advocates that have joined me at my very first legislative preview and last legislative wrap up, thank you so much for all of your continued support. And now that that is done, let's talk about what happened during session. So during today's agenda, we are going to be talking about the landscape of the 60th legislative session. How many bills were introduced? What kind of state questions are you going to expect on the state ballot from a lot of those bills and joint resolutions? What priority issues are we currently tracking that pass through legislative session? You will also hear some updates from our incredible legal and organizing team, as well as our development director, on ways to support our work so we can continue doing this type of work under the dome in the courts and in our communities. And as Tamaya said, at the very end, we are saving all questions at the very end. So if you have any questions, if you can please put that in the Q&A function or in the chat, we will do our best to get to them at the very end. So if you are familiar with legislative session, you know that there are thousands of bills introduced each year. This year, we saw over 2,600 bills that were filed in 2026, in addition to the thousands of bills that were carried over from the previous year, because it is the second legislative session. Many of these bills continue to attack our civil rights as well as our civil liberties. And out of those 2,600 bills, we were tracking about 300 of them. If you have been following session long enough in any sort of capacity, you know that none of the language here is new. Almost all the language is either recycled or copy and paste legislation from think tanks outside of Oklahoma, think tanks such as the Alliance Defending Freedom and the Heritage Foundation, which are both behind Project 2025. So not every single bill we track is going to be discussed here. There just simply is not enough time to do that in the world, but you can continue to use our legislative tracker. If you can scan that QR code or look at the chat to click on that link that Cassidy put in there to go to our legislative tracker to look at the rest of the bills that we are tracking. You have also may have seen several eye-catching pieces of legislation before session has even begun. But I would say it's really important to note that only about 10 to 15% of bills out of those 2,600 are going to become law or even make it to the governor's desk. Many of these bills, as you know, are written at the very beginning of session to grab your attention at the very beginning, especially when it is election season, which it is right now. A lot of these bills have a lot of stops along these ways before even making it to the governor's desk. So let's talk about the legislative landscape of the 2026 or the 60th legislature. So right now we were in the second session of the 60th legislature, which began on Monday, February 2nd, and actually ended early this session on May 14th. So this is I believe, my fifth legislative session. I have never seen it end as early as this, and I am assuming it is a lot of folks wanting to get back out there to campaign for reelection. And since it is the second session, this also means that all of the bills that did not get voted down or did not receive a hearing last year now get carried over into this year, which means not only are we tracking those 2,600 bills, we are also tracking thousands of bills that didn't get voted down or heard last year. So if you spent any time in Oklahoma, you know that we continue to be a Republican trifecta. This means that both chambers, the House and the Senate, the office of the governor, as well as the attorney general, are all Republicans. You may also note that because of this, there isn't a lot of the checks and balances that are usually built into place to build trust and transparency in the government. We have seen the supermajority vote to suspend rules to pass pieces of legislation that wasn't supposed to be heard on the floor or in committee at all. And that is because there is a supermajority there and they can suspend and bypass their own rules. This session, we saw Speaker Hilbert lead the House and Pro Tem Paxton lead the Senate. And you can best believe people are continuing to fight the House as well as the Senate and the office of the governor. So much like last year, the House bills had to pass two committees, the first committee and then the oversight committee before making it to the floor. This could be really great news if you are fighting a lot of bad pieces of legislation, and also really bad news if you are proactively trying to introduce pieces of legislation. So let's talk about all the ways that this legislative landscape impacted session overall. So the overview of session of 2026 is that we saw over 2,600 new bills being introduced this year. However, because of the thousands of bills of last year, we also get the privilege of tracking 6,200 bills because, again, we are in the second legislative session. Out of the 2,600, about 150 bills became law, or the governor signed it, or it became law without his signature. Overall, the legislature overrode 4 vetoes, and there will be no changes to Medicaid expansion that you can expect on the ballot box, despite the numerous attempts throughout legislative session from House and Senate leaders. You have also may have seen the governor was quick to veto a number of bills, almost about 33 or 34 exactly. So this session, he vetoed around 33 bills. Among them were measures that many saw as practical, even bipartisan, efforts that were related to things like public broadcasting, public education, even things such as the gubernatorial succession procedures if the governor is out of state and unable to serve. So one of the vetoes that you may have seen in the news recently is the one that is targeting funding for OETA. OETA has provided educational programming, emergency broadcasts to families across the state, especially during emergencies. This could be a lifeline, especially for rural communities. And now because of the veto in funding, we are now seeing that OETA could be in jeopardy due to this. We have also seen the governor veto an extension to the Oklahoma Advisory Council on Indian Education. This council helps ensure Native students have access to the resources that they need while navigating the educational system. We actually worked with them really closely to pass our Tribal Regalia Protection Bill, and we are very disappointed to see this type of veto. And finally, the governor of Stitt has also vetoed a bill that would have required governors to veto the next line of succession when they are leaving the state or simply unable to serve. You may have remembered the storms back in June of 2023, where both the governor and the vice governor were out of state, and state leaders that were supposed to take over didn't even realize that they were the ones in charge of the state after a couple of days. So we are seeing over 30 bills that were vetoed by the governor this legislative session. We have also seen quite a number of state questions or joint resolutions make it through the legislature that have now become state questions. So we will go through some of them on this list right here. So the first one that will appear and is upcoming on June 16th is SQ 832, which will gradually raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour. We will also see in the special election in the August 25th ballot, SQ 844, which has to do with property taxes, and SQ 846, which came from a joint resolution that is going to change voter ID requirements and extends the ID requirement to every method of voting, not just in person at the polls, and it hands the legislature the job of defining what counts as proof of identity. And lastly, appearing on the general ballot in November 3rd, we are seeing SQ 845, which is going to change provisions related to the Judicial Nominating Commission, or the JNC. If you're not familiar with the JNC, it is a nonpartisan 15-member body that screens applicants and sends this list to the governor for the list of nominees to oversee Oklahoma's courts. It was created after a bribery scandal in the 60s from the Oklahoma Supreme Court. So we see a lot of these courts and judges decide on a number of civil liberties and rights cases, including things such as abortion, school funding, criminal appeals, property rights, etc. So we're really watching SQ 845. And then lastly, of course, another property tax question, SQ 847, will appear on the general ballot. And then talking about some of the priority bills or proactive pieces of legislation that we pushed in 2026. This year, our organization advocated strongly for 3 bills, although unfortunately, we did not see the passing of any of these bills as election season or any other season, or simply being in the state of Oklahoma makes it incredibly difficult to push for any type of bills, including pro-criminal legal reform bills. So our FTP bill, or Failure to Protect bill, SB 1417, was not heard in the Senate. If you are not familiar with Failure to Protect, it unfairly punishes mothers facing domestic violence for failing to control the actions of their abusers in cases of child abuse. Even in the cases where the mother was at work and did not even realize that the abuse was occurring. Many of these women were receiving a lifetime sentence, and what SB 1417 would have done was reduce that lifetime sentence down to 15 years, as well as provide an affirmative defense, which means that evidence would negate the criminal liability of these mothers or evidence of the domestic violence. So, and then once again, you may have heard, we were strongly pushing for a death penalty moratorium bill, SB 601, which is a carryover from 2025. So it was carried over, but it was not heard on the Senate floor. So it passed the first Senate committee and then never received a hearing on the Senate floor. So as the ACLU, we have always held the firm stance that capital punishment is cruel, is error-prone, and racist. Since 2023, we have seen 11 people in our state that have been exonerated from death row, and we believe it is firmly time to pause executions to reevaluate if Oklahoma is, if we should trust the state of Oklahoma to carry out these type of executions. Our bill would have paused executions for 2 years in the state, as well as create a death penalty reform task force. And then lastly, the bill that made it the farthest was our pretrial modernization bill. It did get stuck on the House side, but the great news was that it passed the entire Senate. And then unfortunately on the House side, we were not able to get a House hearing a lot of times because that two committee structure that they have introduced. What it would have done was set the process for bail, require timely, meaningful individual hearings, and develop a statewide pretrial services program. However, then in the middle of session, we were changing the bill to make it a pilot program in Oklahoma County. So all of the recommendations in SB 1381, or our pretrial modernization bill, came directly from the governor's criminal justice task force itself. And I trust that our new policy director, once hired, will continue advocating for each one of these bills next session. And unfortunately, as we talk about some of the issue areas that we have seen throughout session, we have seen a lot of really good bills not pass as well. So half of this we'll be talking about some of the bills that did pass, and then the other half we'll talk about some of the bills that didn't survive session. So first, we'll be talking about criminal legal reform. And unfortunately, none of the 28 bills that were pro-criminal legal, or many of the pro-criminal legal reform bills, did not pass, including the ones that would have established a CIU, or a conviction integrity unit. So CIUs are divisions that investigate possible wrongful convictions, and that could have prevented many of these death sentences. We have seen CIUs established in other states. We have also seen suggested changes to the Pardon and Parole Board be suggested, but not make it through legislative session. So SGR 27 was the result of what happened in Richard Glossop's case, in which he was denied clemency when the Pardon and Parole Board voted in a 2-2 tie, resulting in an automatic denial. What SJR 27 would have done was to say that if it resulted in a tie in clemency, it would not mean an automatic denial for the person seeking clemency from death row. We have also seen measures to increase compensation for the Pardon and Parole Board members, some of them making it full-time. So they have the resources and the time that they need to be able to go over each and every single application. And then lastly, unfortunately, we also saw the fines and fees bill, SB 1450, requiring courts to waive certain fines and fees, not pass either. However, it made it incredibly far throughout session. So we are expecting to see some fines and fees legislation next session. We have also seen none of these good criminal legal reform bills pass except for SB 123. So continuing with some of these criminal legal reform efforts, we have seen bills trying to reform mandatory minimums for juveniles. So SB 1607 would have prohibited life without parole for juveniles and prohibited a mandatory minimum of up to 20 years. It also required judges to take into consideration when determining the individualized sentencing of juveniles. We have also seen mask bans for law enforcement officers not make it very far throughout session. Both HB 2990 and SB 1234 would have prohibited law enforcement officers from obscuring their identities while interacting with the public. This is not only about making sure that law enforcement officers are identifying themselves, but it is also about transparency and accountability as well as public safety. Identification requirements should be required of all law enforcement officers, especially when we have seen individuals use masks to impersonate law enforcement in the past. And then lastly, the good bill that did pass, SB 1213. It allows people or folks that are detained in county jails that are awaiting to be transferred into prison to earn higher credits for the release when they do end up transferred to the prison. And then we are seeing attacks on criminal legal reform, some of them not surviving, which is great news. So in addition to supporting really good criminal legal reform bills, it wouldn't be Oklahoma if we didn't often have to play the defense because of the sheer amount of bills that are attacking our civil rights and our civil liberties. And due to the work of advocates and folks on this call and coalition members who made the phone calls, none of these bad bills passed this session. So SQ 780 or State Question 780 was a state question that was passed in 2016. It reclassified some property and drug crimes from felonies down to misdemeanors. And it also reduced the felony larceny limit from $1,000 down to $500, meaning that you had to steal at least $1,000, or it raised the felony larceny limit from $1,000 $500 to $1,000, meaning you had to steal at least $1,000 to end up with that felony. However, every single legislative session since 2016, we have seen efforts to roll back any type of progress from SQ 780. This year, we saw one that would reduce the felony larceny limit from $1,000 to $900. This bill did not pass. We have also seen efforts on anti-homelessness or anti-housing reforms. HB 3131 also not passing. So HB 3131 would have forced a lot of housing service providers to be continually monitored and have audits to continue providing services. We know that access to stable housing reduces the trauma and cycles of incarceration, and this is why housing is placed under the criminal legal system in our own trackers. For several years, we have seen the legislature taking steps to further criminalize people facing housing insecurity. And HB 3031 would have continued to do this. So it would have made the state funds that a lot of shelters receiving dependent on additional reporting requirements. So we're really glad to see that this bill did not pass legislative session. Continuing to see more attacks on criminal legal reform. Unfortunately, we did see this list of bills pass. So it can't all be good news. Some of these anti-criminal legal reform bills did pass despite our own efforts and other advocates as well. So HB 3262 increased sheriff's fees from $50 to $100. We also saw HB 3581, the protest/the riot bill, pass as well. It expanded the penalties for vandalism during government property during riots, assault and batteries during riots. It also makes it a felony to wear a hood or a mask, quote, without lawful excuse while committing a felony during a riot. We also saw a law enforcement bill, HB 2941, that had to do with administering naloxone. So it said that if you are a first responder, and in Oklahoma state statute, a first responder could literally mean a medical professional or somebody that witnessed it happen or somebody that administers naloxone, that they would have to call law enforcement if somebody is experiencing an overdose at all. And we know that there are many reasons why a person may not want to contact a law enforcement officer while they are overdosing. And the next up are immigrant rights. So this is our largest section that we have tracked. We saw over 30 bills attacking immigrant rights. Thankfully, the 287G agreement from SB 2013 that would have required every single law enforcement agency in Oklahoma to join the 287G program or risk losing state funds did not pass legislative session. So 287G agreements are partnerships between ICE or Immigration and Customs Enforcement and local law enforcement agencies, allowing designated local officers to enforce certain federal immigration laws under ICE's supervision. Thankfully, that did not pass. We also saw a bill that you may have seen in the news as well, SB 1554, that would have prevented nonprofits as well as NGOs from knowingly providing services to undocumented immigrants. So that would have risked this funding of many nonprofits in the state of Oklahoma. And of course, we saw over 8 or 9 attacks on undocumented students receiving in-state tuition as well as scholarships. Many of these bills would have codified federal court rulings that eliminated access to all tuition or to all state tuition for undocumented students. So the bills that I just read off, thankfully none of them passed. As well as the bills that we are about to go over as well. So none of these bills, including the one including healthcare, HB 2969, that would have required healthcare providers to include an immigration status attestation on every application when making eligibility determinations. We also saw bills that would have required small businesses in Oklahoma and all businesses in Oklahoma to sign up for the e-verification program. However, the good news is that we did see one of the bills, HB 3725, which is why it is highlighted right there, get voted down in committee, which is incredibly rare for any type of bill, because if you are a legislator, chances are you are not going to bring that bill up for committee or floor hearing unless you know the vote count. And apparently, they did not count the votes, or the author did not count the votes. So we saw Republicans voting against HB 3725, an e-verification bill in committee. The Republicans that voted against it actually said that e-verify would have placed additional burdens on small businesses and subject Oklahomans to another federal database, which are all great points. And then moving on, we continue to see bills that also didn't pass when it comes to attacking immigrants in our state. We also saw HB 1453 get voted down in committee. It also would have prohibit certain entities from owning or controlling properties. When I say certain entities, they mean foreign entities from owning property in the state of Oklahoma. So we did see HB 1453 get voted down. Many of these nay votes also came from Republicans themselves as well. We also saw further restriction on driver's license not pass as well. So all those bills listed at the very bottom would have required Service Oklahoma to verify the citizenship of the person, to have a citizenship marker on the driver's license, which I don't know if they've ever seen the driver's license in their life. But these are just some of the bills that legislators are believing that is a high priority for Oklahomans in 2026. And then lastly, when it comes to our immigrant rights work, we did see a number of bills pass, mainly regarding state benefits. HB 4423, as well as HB 4422, which I will say neither of these bills regarding state benefits passed. However, I definitely got whiplash trying to follow where many of these bills and the policy language went. So it would have HB 4422 and HB 4423 would have required agencies to double check the immigration status of undocumented immigrants when they are applying for SNAP, TANF, as well as Sooner Care or Medicaid in the state. It was definitely a Trump request bill or a Trump administration request bill, and both of these bills were carried by leadership in the House and the Senate. So we were expecting these type of bills to sail throughout the House. However, that wouldn't be session if things were made easy. Neither of the bills were heard in Senate committee. Then a member of the Senate, which the person that tried to do this was not the author of either bills, a member of the Freedom Caucus attempted to schedule the bill directly onto the Senate floor, even though it did not pass Senate committee. However, it did not receive the 2/3 vote needed to hear it on the floor at all. And this is where we thought the bill fully died. We were very wrong. After that, after 2 weeks, we also saw the Senate Pro Tem Paxton request that the bill be scheduled directly on the Senate floor after pulling it out of Senate committee, even though it had received no hearing in the Senate committee. So after another member tried to do that, he did not receive the 2/3 vote. Then we saw Pro Tem Paxton do the same thing. He did receive the amount of votes that was needed. However, after he received the votes that were needed, he then said, we will not be hearing any more bills throughout session. So I don't know if you got whiplash yet. I certainly did, trying to follow this bill throughout session. And then we thought things were over because the Senate was no longer meeting. And then we got news of an executive order that was signed by Governor Stitt. So on May 6th, the governor signed an executive order, which largely does what HB 4422, as well as HB 4423 would have done. Immigrants will have their immigration status reviewed when applying for SNAP, TANF, as well as Sooner Care or Medicaid in the state. So it goes to show, just because policy language dies throughout the legislative session does not mean that the governor cannot come in and introduce an executive order themselves. We have also seen an attack on undocumented students accessing in-state tuition pass. So SB 1633, it prohibits access to in-state tuition and scholarships for undocumented students. Moving on to reproductive freedom. So the good news is none of these bills that I'm about to read off pass legislative session. Right now, or in the 2026 legislative session, we saw over 20 bills attacking reproductive freedom. Many of these bills reducing access to abortion care in the state, although it is completely banned in the state unless for medical emergencies. So we saw many bills, including things that would have allowed for the prosecution of the pregnant person seeking the abortion. 2 sessions ago, we have also seen bills that would have allowed for the case of charging a person for first-degree murder and the death penalty if they sought out an abortion. We continue to see bills that continue to funnel money into crisis pregnancy centers, or as we prefer to call them, anti-abortion centers, to say that they cannot provide abortion referrals or medications. And then we also saw more restrictions on sex ed, things like the Baby Olivia video, which if you're not well aware of, a Baby Olivia video is simply a video that is medically inaccurate, that says things that are simply anti-abortion, that would have required students in public schools to view this type of video, even though much of the information is medically inaccurate. And then we also saw bills that would have completely banned access to sex ed in Oklahoma move throughout session as well. And then lastly, some of the scariest bills that I have seen during my time at the ACLU were healthcare denial bills, blanket healthcare denial bills that would have allowed any type of provider to not deny healthcare based on conscience alone. So provider is not defined in the bill itself. It could be a receptionist that does not agree with your beliefs or how the way that you present yourself, being able to deny you care. We also saw this type of bill pass in Tennessee, and we saw the impact of that on marginalized folks. A Tennessee woman was denied prenatal care by a doctor who objected to her unmarried status, and they cited healthcare bills like this. So we're really grateful that none of these bills passed and that our coalition partners were able to make the phone calls to try to stop these bills. Now, unfortunately, it's not all great news when it comes to repro freedom. We also saw attacks on abortion pass. So HB 1168 criminalizes the distribution of abortion medication, and it will become effective November 1st. It is already a crime to possess these pills without a prescription in the state of Oklahoma. And if you are ordering these abortion pills by mail online, it already requires a prescription. We also saw SB 1503. It allows organizations from outside the state to receive benefits under the Choosing Childbirth Care Act. So SB 1503 was written to benefit one organization in Texas, the Human Coalition. This is a call center based in Texas and a marketing operation that tries to intercept people that are seeking abortion services online or looking up the information online. So what they will use the money for is to place ads, to do targeted outreach for folks that need help and are seeking for abortions online in the state of Oklahoma. It also has an effective date of November 1st. And then, of course, we are seeing attacks on 2S LGBTQ plus rights. We saw over 15 bills attacking 2S LGBTQ plus Oklahomans. None of the bills that I'm about to read off passed, which is great news. So despite numerous attacks on this, we did not see any of the bills I'm about to read off pass. Many of these bills I'm about to go through would have affected nearly every aspect of life for Oklahomans, from forming families and healthcare to education to public service. We saw not one, but two measures restricting adoption and foster care opportunities for same-sex couples being introduced in 2026. We saw bills bills limiting access to best practice medical care for trans youth that would have placed the government between families and their healthcare providers. We saw bills that would have impacted schools and made it harder for trans and LGBTQ plus students to feel safe and supported and respected in their own learning environments get introduced in 2026 as well. And then lastly, bills regarding state employees, prohibiting them from putting their pronouns in their official communications, such as emails. So once again, we know that our legislators are really tackling the bills that Oklahomans think of every single day. And then unfortunately, we did see a number of anti-2S LGBTQ bills that did pass. So SB 904 was a last minute shucked bill, meaning it changed overnight from something completely unrelated to attacking trans Oklahomans overnight. Halfway through session, we saw the governor publicly endorse a shucked bill, or a bill that was changed overnight, and we knew that this was going to be the bill that reached his desk. So SB 904 bans Medicaid or state coverage for trans Oklahomans accessing gender affirming care. It also says no state-owned properties or healthcare facilities may provide just gender affirming care. It's incredibly important to note that this does not include mental health counseling. Cassidy, thank you so much. Cassidy put the FAQ that our lovely legal fellow Travis created. So if you want to click on the chat or click on the link in the slides, it will take you to an FAQ of what SB 904 does and does not do. We also saw bills attacking ID access for trans Oklahomans. The first one, 1225, it bans updating gender markers on birth certificates, and HJR 1032 banning updating gender markers on driver's licenses. Neither of these bills regarding IDs are retroactive like the ones in Kansas are. Moving on to class censorship, none of the bills that we're about to talk about passed except HB 3700. So none of the bills attacking free speech in schools and public libraries passed. But however, with HB 3700, we know that this type of bill stemmed from the OUSA incident where the student received a 0 on her paper. So we did see that bill pass, and it is going to require all higher education institutions to implement policies ensuring that grades are evaluated solely on, quote, an academic basis. However, we also saw a book ban, HB 2978, that would have placed a blanket ban on any, quote, obscene materials from public school libraries get voted down in Senate Education Committee. So it still happens. If you are making the phone calls, if you feel like it isn't working, clearly we are seeing the results of the advocacy when it comes to these type of book bans. We have also seen attacks on religious freedom, but the great news on this is that none of the bills attacking religious freedom survived during the 2026 legislative session. We were particularly worried about bills that would have allowed for school prayer. It would have mandated a period during the school day to be allotted for school prayer. We saw both of those bills move incredibly quickly throughout legislative session, but thankfully it never received a hearing on the Senate side. We also saw bills continuing to discriminate against Muslim Oklahomans, including SB 1486 that would have designated CARE Oklahoma or the Council on American Islamic Relations and designate them as a terrorist organization. So they continue to recycle bill language, as you can see. And then last but certainly not least, attacks on voting rights and elections. So we saw over 10 bills attacking voting rights and election access, which none of them survived except SJR 47, which later became SQ 846, which we talked about at the very beginning of this wrap up. So this was discussed at the very beginning of the wrap up. What SGR 47 or SQ 846 would have done is that it changes the ID voting requirements when it comes to every method of voting. This could also include requiring ID requirements for absentee voting, which you may ask, how would they do that? we also have the same question. I will note that SJR 47 and SQ 846 is also nicknamed the Oklahoma SAVE Act, which do with that what you will. And we have also seen none of the attacks on the initiative petition process survive this year. However, there is still ongoing litigation against SB 1027 from last year, which almost completely gutted the initiative petition process. So we will continue to watch that as it moves throughout the courts. We know that one of the only ways that Oklahomans can truly express themselves and their opinions on issues is through the initiative petition process, whether this is medical marijuana, criminal legal reform, or Medicaid extension. We have seen Oklahomans turn out to the polls to make their voices heard. And we know that this scares many legislators, which is why we continue to see attacks on this as well. We also see attacks on the absentee voting process or the absentee ballot process. So SB 1879 thankfully did not pass. It says that the only allowed reason for somebody to request an absentee ballot would have been if you were one, employed outside of the entity, or two, have physical illness that prevents you from going to the polls, or three, you are a primary caretaker or a member or spouse or a dependent or member of somebody in the military. There are a number of reasons why people enjoy absentee voting, myself included. So we are just going to keep tracking these pieces of legislation and fighting and advocating through each attacks on the voting rights and elections. So if you are not tired of hearing me talk about the numerous bills throughout legislative session of what survived and what didn't, I am now going to pass it over to our formidable legal director, Megan Lambert, to update you all on some of the legal updates and what our legal team has been up to. Megan, take it away.
Yeah, thank you so much, Cindy, and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for that update, Cindy. It is always incredible to hear how many battles you successfully fight all at one time. So really grateful for all of your work this and every session. I wanted to provide folks with a few updates about what our litigation has looked like over the past few months. First and foremost, we have joined as appellate counsel in Quiros v. Mullen. And as folks know, we are now seeing mass deportation and detention campaign from the Trump administration. And part of how they are doing this is reinterpreting a statute and finding that folks who have lived in the United States, who are already residents here, but entered without inspection, are subject to mandatory detention without bond. And folks in the immigration space and who are part of our immigrant communities know that this is not how any administration or the federal government has understood this statute ever before. Folks who are residents are subject to discretionary detention and are entitled to bond. And so through Quiros v. Mullen, we are hoping to reestablish that clear precedent in the 10th Circuit and hopefully end the mass deportation and detention scheme within the 10th Circuit. Second, White v. Hess, that is our bail case in Canadian County. Folks may recall we reached a landmark settlement earlier this year where Canadian County is now required to hold individualized hearings when setting conditions of pretrial release, where they are required to evaluate folks' ability to pay the bail imposed, and in fact, whether any cash bail amount is required to ensure folks return to court. And so through this settlement, we are hoping to functionally eradicate the imposition of unaffordable bail to make sure that no one is held in jail simply because they cannot afford to buy their freedom. And so now we are in a 2-year period where we are monitoring the court's compliance with that agreement. Next is Burt v. Drummond. So this is our classroom censorship case. Folks may recall we received a partial injunction and we went before the 10th Circuit to defend our partial injunction, but to also advocate that the 10th Circuit enjoin the law in its entirety. So we are hoping to ensure that the state cannot enforce any part of 1775 while we continue to litigate the case on the merits. And then lastly, we have Padres Unidos de Tulsa v. Drummond. That is our challenge to House Bill 4156 that criminalizes unlawful entry or re-entry into Oklahoma. Functionally, it is Oklahoma trying to criminalize the federal immigration system. They do not have the authority to do that. Luckily, the district court agreed with us. And so we were able to preliminarily enjoin this law early in our litigation so that the Oklahoma cannot enforce this law as we continue to litigate the case. We recently went to the 10th Circuit in this case as well to defend that injunction. And in both Padres and Burt, we hope to hear from the 10th Circuit on those injunction motions by early fall. And with that, I will wrap it up and hand it over to our organizing manager, Carly, who has been exceedingly busy this year to tell you all about our previous and upcoming events. Carly, take it away.
Thanks, Megan, and thanks for those updates to Cindy too, as we know she has worked so hard this session. My name is Carly, like Megan said. My pronouns are she and her, and I'm the organizing manager for the ACLU of Oklahoma. Our organizing team is constantly working to support, educate, and mobilize our community, and we work on a plethora of issues, including the current fight against flock cameras in OKC. So I wanted to share a little bit that last Wednesday, we had a town hall on flock cameras, which are a brand of automatic license plate readers. And we know that they're threatening our civil rights and liberties because they're infringing upon our privacy by tracking our locations and actively sharing our data. They are also including discriminatory targeting that lead to unjust stops and false arrests. Because of these and many other issues, we ask that all OKC residents sign the petition urging our city officials to get flock cameras out of Oklahoma City. You can scan the QR code or click on the link that Cassidy just put in the chat. As a multi-issue organization, the ACLU of Oklahoma also includes the Not in My Name Coalition. And the mission of our coalition is to take a stand against the use of capital punishment in Oklahoma and to raise awareness, educate, and mobilize individuals and groups about the death penalty and the issues with it. As a member, you'll be informed of news and local events, you'll gain a space to organize, and you'll join a network of dedicated individuals who are committed to working alongside you. On our next slide, you'll see that each month we have volunteers join us for helping with tasks and planning for upcoming events. We're meeting on Friday, June 19th this month in Oklahoma City. And to learn more about that, you can join our volunteer group. If you're already volunteering with us, just make sure to check your email and you can email me for more information on that too. June is super busy. We have a bunch of Pride events and Juneteenth coming up, and we hope that you can join us at those. You can register to march in OKC Pride with us. It's on June 28th. Everyone is welcome, so feel free to share that with your friends and family too. And then finally, a great way to stay up to date is to join our rapid response team, which means that you'll receive text messages with updates on current issues and ways you can take action. We truly have volunteer options for everyone as a multi-issue organization that does work online and across the state. And I hope that you can find something and somewhere to join us to fight for the civil rights and liberties of every person in Oklahoma. Feel free to reach out at any time. You can email me, and I hope that I see you all out at events this June. With that, I'll go ahead and pass it over to our outstanding development director, Sarah Jane.
Thank you so much, Carly, for that update. The organizing efforts you lead in the community are just so integral to our mission and part of why we can make needed challenges reality. So thank you again. You, along with the support of our staff and our members, play a huge part in making this world happen. Again, my name is Sarah Jane Del Monte. I'm the development director, and I use she, her pronouns. Right now, it's no secret to everyone that the ACLU of Oklahoma defends basic freedoms. But many people don't know that the work that you have heard about today was made possible by our members. And there are people like you and me and many people on the call. And we are forever grateful for those of you that have joined us in the fight to make a just and equitable Oklahoma. Our members empower our work to take a stand against threats to constitutional liberties, and now more than ever, you and I are seeing these rights being stripped from everyone in the nation, and this is just compounding daily. But we are not just seeing these threats. As you all know, we're feeling them too. And the ACLU has been the center of nearly every major civil liberties battle in the US. We've been doing this for over 100 years. Many Americans are not aware that we were part of landmark cases such as Brown versus Board of Education, Roe v. Wade, ACLU versus Reno, which was internet speech, Loving versus Virginia, and Oberfeld versus Hodges, which was around the bans on same-sex marriage and that being unconstitutional. But I have no doubt that, I have no doubt that one of these cases has protected the civil liberties of either you or one of your loved ones. And all of the work that you've heard about today from our team, this was funded by our members at the ACLU. And these members strengthen our lobbying efforts and our grassroots community through their membership. They join because they understand about freedoms and that they're at stake and they want to help fuel our work, such as with the landmark cases I mentioned. Our members want to be part of the greater good. And we need to expand this work, and we want you by us by becoming members. So I invite you to join. Dues are $35 for a year, or even more if you wish to pay more. Which entitles you to be a card-carrying member. You've probably heard that before. That saying is very popular with ACLU members. And your membership is for both Oklahoma and national. You can also sign up to do a monthly gift, and that's as little as $10 a month, if that is easier for you. You choose the amount you're comfortable with. We want you to be part of our people power, and we do not want a dollar amount to keep you from joining. So today I asked for you to scan the QR code on the screen, become a member. We want you to help fuel our fight to defend everyone's rights, your rights, both locally and nationwide. So now I want to hand the mic over back to Tamaya Cox-Ray, our ED, so she can wrap up this conversation and answer questions that you may have.
Thank you all to this amazing team for the amazing work that has happened during the session. I know we are close to time, but we do have a few questions for Megan and Cindy. And please note that as Cassidy has said it, this recording will be available on our YouTube channel if you want to send it or if you want other information you missed out. So real quickly, Cindy, if you can come on screen, and Megan, if you can come on screen. This one's more of a process question. Can any of the bills that were carried over, or can any of the bills that were presented or that were not heard, can they be carried over to next session?
Not for 2027, because it is going to be the first legislative session. So we run session every 2 years. So last year's bills were carried over into this session, but this year's bills will not be carried over into next session.
Yeah, good question. They may be reintroduced in identical, but the bills numbers won't carry on. Thank you for that. This is more of a ethereal question, but it says, one of the things that I'm concerned about is like who's speaking to the legislators, like who has their ear. Some of it is from very conservative groups. Maybe talk to a little bit about how can we get back to the legislators listening to real scholars, especially around some of these educational issues. What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, so some of the best ways is making the phone calls. I always hear 7 to 10 phone calls really impacts the way a legislator votes and lets them know that folks are watching them. And I always say, find the right messenger. So maybe if that messenger isn't you or you feel nervous, finding maybe a business owner or a key player in the district and sending somebody else to talk to them. A lot of times we are hearing these national think tanks have tons of money to send their lobbyists to talk to them. And yet a lot of times it can take 7 to 10 phone calls to let legislators know that we are watching the way that they vote.
Thank you, Cindy. Megan, this question's for you regarding one of the riot bills that Cindy kind of talked about. But could you maybe tell us a little bit about, is there a meaningful distinction in Oklahoma law between riot and protest? And does the bill 3581 expand penalties and outlaws any additional activities related to or how does that relate to, how does that impact protests?
Yeah, thank you. That is an excellent question and has been at the center of our protest rights work forever. So there is a definition of riot in the Oklahoma Code. I put that in the chat here. I would argue it is not necessarily meaningful. And in fact, we have active litigation arguing that the definition of riot does violate the First Amendment because it encompasses protected speech. And our litigation is focused around the threat component, right, where it says threat to use force or violence. And so there is a distinction in Oklahoma law. It is insufficient. And in fact, as written, is does not hold constitutional muster in that it includes and could criminalize protected conduct. And so there are some protections around protest rights in Oklahoma, though they are not nearly strong enough to either actually protect Oklahomans exercising their First Amendment right to protest or to comport with the basic requirements of the Constitution. And what that means is any attempt to expand the riot statute, like we see through the bill that passed this session, also endangers folks exercising their protest rights. And so that's part of why, from a litigation strategy standpoint, we chose to focus squarely on the definition of riot to try to maximize impact because we do see so many attacks on protesters using the riot statute. So that's part of why we chose to go directly to the source and challenge the definition of riot to strengthen that distinction and protect folks that are showing up in protest.
Thank you, Megan. That is super helpful. Yes, as one of our participants has said, that is very alarming and concerning. Well, I do want to thank you. I think we are right at time. I do want to thank you all for joining us for this hour. I hope you received information that was helpful. Again, I think what session we learn every year is that we have some wins that we need to celebrate. But there's also an opportunity for us to come together as community to learn better ways to make sure that we are advocating for one another at the Capitol. It's essential. So if this was something you're interested in, I do encourage you all to make sure that you are downloading, or excuse me, that you have clicked on the link to get involved. We really want to see you at our next advocacy day that we hold every year during session at the Capitol. And more importantly, if there are ways that you want to get involved with the ACLU, please make sure to get in contact with our organizing manager, Carly, to get you signed up. We only do this work together. That's how we move Oklahoma to a better place. So once again, thank you so much for your time this afternoon, and we'll see you in the streets. You all take care. Thank you.